Hello guys, in this video let's call this get user API from dashboard service using Refit. And this API, that is get user, it is a part of user management service. Now the steps involved. So first we will create C# interface, let's call it iUser management service, and it represents user management service. And then we will create methods in that interface, and each of that method it will represent respective API from user management service. And then we will observe that Refit, it does serialization and deserialization for us behind the scene. We don't have to manually construct HTTP request. And finally, calling an API, it's like calling just another C# instance method. Now we are in Visual Studio. I have created this function app, that is user management service, and here we have three APIs, that is get user, get users, and then add user. Again guys, these API, I mean the technology in which the APIs are developed does not matter. Okay, and one more thing, see, we have not added any logic over here. We are simply returning the hard coded list. You can see over here. Now let's try to run this. So our function app is running. Let me just copy this API, that is get user. Let's try to execute it from Postman and see if it works. So I'll paste it over here and I'll say 1 and let's send. Yeah, it's working and it returns user ID 1 and username Harsha. Now let's try to call this API from dashboard service using Refit. Now we are again in Visual Studio, but this time we are in dashboard service, and now here we have this API, that is load user dashboard, you can see. And from this method or from this API, let's call get user API of user management service using Refit. Now the first thing, let's install required NuGet packages. So I will right click, I will say manage NuGet packages. Let's go to browse. Let's type Refit over here, and so we need to install first two packages, that is Refit and Refit.http client factory. So Refit, and let's not install the latest one because we are working on .NET Core 6. So I will install this 601 install. So let's install the second one, and here also let's install 601 and install, and I will say accept. And now let's go to our dashboard service.cs. Now let's create interface, that is iUser management service, which will represent that user management service. So again I will right click over here, say add, I'll say folder, so it is our services. Now again right click in services, I'll say add, I'll say new item, I'll say it's interface, and let's give name iUser management service.cs. let's add, let's first make it public. Now let's create methods in this interface, and each of these method it will correspond to respective API from user management service. So for example, if we go to this user management service, we have three APIs, that is get user, get users, and finally add user. So we need to create three methods in that iUser management service interface, but as of now for simplicity we'll create only these two methods, that is get user and get users. So again go back to our dashboard service. So here I will say task of user, so I'll say get user, and here I need to provide int user ID, and then I'll say task of enumerable of user, and I'll say get users. So let me fix this red line. So I'll say yeah, using dashboard service.models, and let's save. And guys, if I open this user class, see it has just two properties, that is user ID and username, and which match to this return type of this get user API. Okay, now let's go back to our user management service interface again. So we have these two methods, and both of these methods, they represent get API, right? So let's provide the attribute get, and let's specify the URL root as well of those respective APIs. So we'll say it's get, and it's actually get user API, and here we have user ID. And similarly the second one, again it's get API, and the root is /get users. So let's say, and if I take my mouse to this get keyword, see it says refit.get attribute. So this get attribute is available because we have installed that refit NuGet package. Okay, and one more thing guys, so similar to this get keyword, we'll have attributes like post and put as well. Okay guys, so we have created this interface, but then now we need to link, or we need to associate this interface with user management service URL as well, right? For example, see, this is our user management service and it's been running. So we need to link this interface with this URL, that is http localhost 7239 API, and let's do that. And we will provide this dependency in Azure function startup class. So let's do that. So let's go back to our dashboard service. So guys, this dashboard service, again it's a function app, but then it can be ASP.NET Core application as well, it doesn't matter. So let's install the required NuGet package for creating our function app startup class. So for that I will right click over here, I'll say manage NuGet packages, browse, and let's install this, that is microsoft.azure.functions.extensions, and let's install. I'll say accept. Now let's create our function app startup class where we'll inject that refit dependency, that means that association between our interface and that user management service URL. So I'll right click over here, I'll say add, I'll say class, and you can give any name. So I'll say my function app startup.cs. Let's first make it public, and let's inherit this class from this, that is function startup. Now guys, if you see, this function startup is available because just now we installed that NuGet package. Okay, and now it shows red line. So let's fix this. So I'll say implement abstract class, and we have to implement this configure method. And now inside this configure method we will provide our refit dependency. Okay, so I will delete this line and I will paste this part of the code, and I will explain this code. So before that, let's make it microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. Okay, so guys, what we are saying is, for this user management service we need to configure the base address, that is base URL, and for this simply copy this till API. So this is the base URL of our user management service. So let's copy it, let's paste it over here. So that means this now our user management service interface, whatever methods are there, so those methods will correspond to the APIs which are there in this URL. Okay, and lastly let's decorate this namespace with this. So say here dashboard service dot my function app startup. So essentially what it says is this line, that is line number 11. So whenever dependencies are requested throughout function app, please look those dependencies in this my function app startup, because this is our function startup class. Okay, now finally let's go to dashboard service and let's inject this user management service as a dependency. So I will copy this name, let's go back to dashboard service here. Okay, I will say private user management service, I will say user management service. Okay, let me first fix this red line. So I'll say using, now let me create constructor over here. So I'll say generate constructor and generate this. Yeah, So basically we have simply injected this iUser management service into this dashboard service. So whenever we will call any method from this interface, that is iUser management service, behind the scene it will call the corresponding or respective API from actual user management service. And let's try that. So let's go down in this load user dashboard method. Here I will say user is equal to user management service, that is the interface or service which we have just injected, dot get user, and let's say 1, and let's add await over here. So let's save, let's add a debugger on line number 32 and let's run this function app. So let's run. And you see the function app is running. So let's copy this API or this URL. Let's go to Postman and let me paste it over here, and let's specify user ID as 1, and let's click on save. And you see the debugger has been hit. Now if I press F10 and if I check the contents of this user variable, see user ID 1 and username Harshal. That means we have successfully called the user management's get user API using Refit.